Hey, welcome to our next SDV Coffee Talk episode with Augustine, Florian, Moritz. Our topic this evening will be the partnerships in SDV development and all. We have three experts here. Probably you can have a quick intro. Augustine, you want to start?
Sure. Thanks for inviting me to your SDV Coffee Talk tonight here in Germany. I'm Augustine. Probably some of you know me already from the content that I share on LinkedIn. Happy to talk about the partnerships in the automotive and SDV space here today with you, Fatih, Moritz, and Florian. Today I represent my personal opinion here, so it's a full disclosure. I also work for MHP, which is a consulting company, but that's like a private session here. So it's what I tell today has nothing to do with what I do in my day-to-day job.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Florian?
Fatih, I have to correct you. We have 4 experts here. I mean, don't be so shy.
Okay.
You're here too.
True.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Florian. I'm about 20 years in the automotive industry. So about the first third in what you call the traditional car industry, the second third at Tesla and NIO. So the market leaders right now around the top is SDV. And for the last 5-6 years now as a consultant for iProcess Consulting. In that context, spent a lot of time on a variety of events. I've been at 16 conference and events this year. So I have one more SEMA this week and SDV Europe next week. And then I take December off, I think. But I have a lot of observations from those events. So I'm happy to discuss those.
Hi, my name is Moritz. Passionate about SDV. I'm working for Electrobit, but as Augustine or anyone else in here, it's a private session, so all opinions are personal.
Thanks. I think probably you can just start with Augustine. Augustine, I know your awesome charts in LinkedIn, actually. Probably you could just talk a little bit the story behind these charts, and we can just start.
Yeah, how did you come up with that? Those are awesome.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm quite interested.
Like a lot of work.
Yeah, I guess so. It's very extensive, so to say.
Yeah, and that's a long story. It started already, I would say, 2012, 2013. I was writing there in back in the days in German. I had my own blog that was covering the mobility transformation more than with focus on mobility services like Uber, Grab, Lyft, Didi, and what was going on in the space. And I think then around 2017, 18, I shifted then to LinkedIn and expanded my scope of topics, then also in ADAS, AD, software-defined vehicles, and so on. And it's my absolute passion. It grew over time, and then I received good feedback from like the community, and loved the discussions with the community around that. And then also the event participation. I think Florian, we met several times at events as well. Moritz, we too. Fatih, I think that's still on our bucket list that we meet there as well. Yeah, so that's basically the story. Yeah, so it grew over time. It's driven by my passion and the community around that, and so that's quite simple.
Cool.
So I think everybody watching is like super curious, how much effort is it to put one of those together? And if you just say a lot, that's okay.
I would say it's more than if I would count the hours, I think I'm not sure if I think it will be a bit crazy, but I would roughly say like one post is 3 to 4 hours.
Oh, I would have expected more. How do you get all the data anyhow?
It depends on then like the, let's say, complexity of the chart. So you might remember like the charts where I on the circles I put together the automotive industry or then also startups. Probably that's then like 1 day, 1.5 days to put this together. But I would say I'm quite effective if my let's say a database of information and reading list where I collect everything, all the data points and so on, and then when I have an idea for a new chart, I know where I need to go, and then it's quite fast.
I think a couple of days before, last week probably, I've seen some charts with different startups. You put startups and in automotive in the SDV context. How do you see this ecosystem actually? you have all this data, which the startup is where and what is doing. And what do you think how these startups can contribute actually in this SDV development journey?
I would say in different ways. So one is if you look at the tool chain, I think we have more and more startups there, especially if it comes to ADAS and AD simulation. There are a lot of activities. Florian, I would assume you have then also more like startups in the tool chain for like software development, coding, maybe AI assistants, and so on. And then if you look at the different layers of the software-defined vehicle stack, I mean, then also on each layer there are startups. Yeah, so there then the ones on the semiconductor side, which are developing purpose built and semiconductors for like the ADAS or for the in-vehicle use. I mean, if you think about NVIDIA, probably it's not the best one or not the most optimized one for like the in-vehicle use. So there we see some activities, sensors, of course, with then like all the lidars, radars, sphere cameras, new actuators, and so on. And then you can like also go up like to the in-car software space with now like Rust-based OS solutions, digital cockpit, and then also cloud. Yeah, so I mean, there like if you think about the layers, there you find startups everywhere, and there you also see okay how long it takes for the startups to get to like serial production. So in this chart you mentioned, Fatih, I think you see there that like for others, I think the peak of foundations are like 10 years ago. The same if you think about like all the cybersecurity startups in the cloud and so on. Yeah, so it takes quite a while from founding a startup until you see it then in the vehicles.
And I think it's very hard if you have a startup that has actual hardware, a product, right? And that's why we actually see a good amount of startups in the software or tool world, because you don't have to have this gigantic amount of funding to get prototypes and so on. It's a little easier. And just to add on, I mean, the emergence of AI or all kinds of AI-based tools is really around the startup world right now. So there's a lot of really cool tools actually. I mean, things like an AI-based tool that just cleans up your requirements, right? Just for starters, and this kind of stuff. So some real interesting good news stuff there, Moritz.
With all the uncertainty in the industry, and still, I think a lot of opportunities for new value propositions. Would you say right now is a good time to found a startup in automotive, or rather not, because of the economic uncertainty? Was it a shitty idea after all, always because the purchasing timelines are so awfully long in automotive?
So what's the question for Florian, or?
I just want to say, I don't know who you asked, but I can give my quick thought on it. I personally, I mean, it's always risky to found a startup, but it's only rewarding if you try it, else you will never know. I think it is actually a good time if you found the right startup, because the tools and the technology emerging, there's some stuff you can do now that was impossible some years ago. So if you have the right idea, go for it. To found another startup that makes another tool or product that's already out there, it's probably not a good time. My observation.
Yeah. And I think you also would need to anticipate what could be like a use case in 5 to 10 years from now, or because what I mentioned is okay, if we talk about startups like Horizon Robotics or Applied Intuition or Fort Helix or Upstream Security, or you name it, but these are all startups that were founded 5 to 10 years ago or even longer ago,
big.
and now they're like we talk about it in the industry. So I think that's then also the challenge. You need to find a topic that could be relevant and like in the future.
I mean, startups usually. I mean, this is some kind of a question in my mind actually. Startups are usually very fast in development, but in partnerships with the big OEMs, I think this could be quite difficult because the development cycle in big OEMs is really long. You know, I mean, if I look on vehicle development or so, I mean, it takes years. I mean, usually startups don't work in this this rhythm. I mean, they are much faster. I don't know how this fits actually together. I mean, how this can. I don't know how this would work.
Yeah, you see quite a cultural clash there. That's for sure. I mean, always when you know the theory that we put the good kids and the bad kids in the same classroom, and the good kids pull up the bad kids. That's usually not happening. But it is definitely a desire of the traditional OEMs to learn from startups, to learn about the pace and about their processes. But yeah, it's hard for startups to slow down to that level at one point.
I would also assume that the OEMs need to change there as well. I mean, they know that like their culture doesn't fit to the startup culture. Everything now about all the technology innovations, they also know, okay, they probably need startups or external support to improve the products or stay competitive. So what I see then there also when I talk then to like people at the OEMs, that they change, okay, how they could collaborate with startups, because in the past it was like, okay, you had an OEM collaborating with a startup or investing in a startup, and then okay, maybe it was a great story for the press, but then after a couple of years or months, I mean, the startup was smashed because okay, the startup was not ready to scope with like the bureaucracy and like all the processes of the OEMs, and then also the OEMs were not able to adjust their processes and then also their like thresholds, etc., to be able to work there with the startups.
All right. I think that is it's a comment, it's not a question, and of course that is correct. One observation I also have is that like 5-10 years ago, OEMs, when they needed a solution to a problem, they went to their traditional tier ones and tasked them to find or to develop it. But on the other hand, now you see actually much more openness. At least I see much more openness with the OEMs to work with startups that are fairly young, because they see that they have something they don't have and they don't find in their suppliers right now. Maurice, you took a deep breath. That looks like you wanted to say something.
I'm not so sure about this point. I mean,
okay.
Yes, talking to build a POC, you see that a lot. That leap of faith to put something into production that you need to maintain for 10 years or longer. This is something that I still think is a big step. And for me, this is the big question. Well, this or the underlying question on, okay, is it a good idea to found a startup at all in automotive or not? When you look outside the tooling scope, which is a bit easier, does it make sense to found a startup for software that actually ends up in the car at all? And if we want to see it, what do we need to do to make that work? Like, what if you want to get the Shazams or the Airbnbs into the car? What does it take to actually make that work?
I mean, there is this one question. Don't you think with all the pressure from China, OEMs need to speed? I mean, that our OEMs need to speed up instead? I mean,
instead of what? Instead of what they do right now, or instead of working with startups?
I think this is.
I mean, generally, yes.
Yeah, in general, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the development life cycles are way too long, and the underlying value proposition of the SDV, we've talked about this in previous editions, is you want to deliver end customer value to customers quicker, and that means you can't rely upon selling a new car to actually provide new value. That's the entire idea behind SDV. And yes, car development needs to be quicker, but also rolling out new functions in existing cars needs to be quicker. And I think not only China has been pushing us quite a bit, but also very dominantly, yes.
I want to go back to the point that you mentioned, Moritz, is a good point or good time to start like an automotive startup or startup in automotive or not. I think it also depends on, like, if you talk about software-defined vehicles, on which layer you are. Or so if you talk about vehicle OS, probably I'm not sure if it's a good space. Yeah. So if we talk about like all the middleware and so on, what's going on there, I think that would be, I would say, the toughest part. But if you're thinking about like more like digital cockpit, and if we have then real SDVs and we have like the decoupling of then basically the digital cockpit and then the underlying layers, then could make sense, yeah, to develop then the apps or like features, use cases for this layer. And then also, if you think about the cloud, I think that could be then also an interesting space. If you think about cybersecurity or like digital twins, data management, and so on, I think there's space for startups. If we talk only about like the vehicle OS and the vehicle middleware, I think that's quite complicated.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And the other thing is also there's some areas which there's only one solution necessary, so that you don't need 20 or 30 solutions for it. So,
yeah.
well, I mean, you see now they're working on automotive grade Linux, and you have QNX, and there with the market is almost saturated, right? So you don't need another 2 or 3 different options for that. This is what it is.
Yeah, and then if OEMs still want to like now it's like BMW and Mercedes start their open source core project and so on. Yeah, so I think that's very complicated space, and with limited customers also. And as you said, Florian, I mean it's like a lot of stones already set there.
I have one question. I mean, it's also connected to the question which is now on the screen. I mean, what would be actually? I mean, at the moment we know what the SOPs are, how OEMs develop cars, and how much time it takes. I mean, if we go for the ideal case of SDV, I mean, Moritz, you have this classification of different SDV levels, published I think a couple of weeks or months ago. What would be? I mean, what would be the ideal time to develop a feature in an SDV? Full, you have the ideal case. I mean, what do you think? What do you think? I mean,
when I look at the SDV levels, the really interesting ones are level 4 and 5. So level 4 is you actually have function upgrades that you can roll out to all generations of vehicles that you have in the field without needing to create a variant for every vehicle. And level 5 is the full iOS dream of having a third-party app ecosystem. I introduced that domain qualifier and that SDV qualification shortly after the initial release, because I currently think level 5 system is not very meaningful for a lot of functions. I don't expect to see level 5 system for, let's say, ADAS. I don't expect that we will see third-party app development for you get the next, I don't know, parking function or adaptive cruise control or whatnot. So I think we have to differentiate a bit. When I look at level 5, cockpit is obviously the sweet spot. This is where differentiation happens a lot. This is where you want to have user-driven updates. And this is where the production cycles of a vehicle shouldn't matter. I don't want to have to buy the next car to roll out the next function that I just want to subscribe to. So for that, I think the question or comment related to those famous 18 months of the life cycle of a vehicle or the next vehicle generation, it shouldn't matter. When I look at level 4 systems, when you look at vehicle function, I think this is a different thing. And the times between new functions will be longer. And every function that you see will be rolled out by an OEM with a corresponding quality control. I think actually going for something that is in the order of months is appropriate for that. Shouldn't be a lot longer, but what you really need to have is really that decoupling of the life cycle of the vehicle from that of the software that you intend to roll out. So this is the important point of reaching level 4, because when you do level 3, when you do have function upgrades only for specific vehicle generations, there's going to be no good reason to backport a new feature to the last 5 vehicle generations that you've had. So vehicles will reach that end of upgrade support very, very quickly in level 3 systems. And this is really why level 4 and 5 are the important ones to get right.
Yes, exactly, 100%. We have to get away from this idea of like from scratch to SOP. In the end, you have to decouple the software from the hardware, and the software development is ongoing. And then there is the vehicle development that happens in parallel for looks and more whatever modern hardware features and so on, or mechanical features. And then whenever that is ready, the software just gets adapted to it. And it's the same software that I ran on the vehicle before. I'm not sure if I mentioned it in one call, in one of those sessions before, but the Tesla Autopilot got adapted to the Model X back in the day, 6 weeks before SOP. Before that, they ran it in other like vehicle platforms, because it's just a parameter change for the height of the camera. And that is the picture book example for that already. And that was in 2015. That you take a software functionality and feature set and put it on a different platform that actually can host that. And I think this is exactly as Moritz says, this is where we as an industry have to go, else we will run into the issue of outdated hardware way too fast.
And I think when we tie this back now to that discussion that we had about startups, I think level 5 systems, so especially ones that tie into a cockpit, they are the sweet spot for startups. As long as you have a sufficient number of vehicles that support that level 5 platform. So size of ecosystem, attractiveness for the developer community is hugely important for that. So building proprietary solutions, I think, is the extremely unproductive way of trying to build something like it.
I mean, we draw the connection to cell phones way too often, but here it is again, right? I mean, the Apple iPhone was so successful because of the app market, right? The App Store. And the reason why that was so successful is because it was possible to have one platform that can be served by multiple players from the outside. And I want to add more. It's not only the the infotainment system, but there's also the integration with the environment, right? And I see there's a lot of room, just like payment apps or like parking apps and so on. Integrate them properly. And this is also not new. It's just not really fashionable yet. I mean, we had. Most people don't know, but at Tesla, we developed the Mercedes B-Class electric in 2012. And that one actually had a stock market app in the display, which didn't come from us. So you could look at your 4 favorite stocks while we're driving. So it's not a new idea. It's just, I mean, also the iPhone wasn't the first device that held apps on a handheld. It's just like the one that made it really popular.
Yeah. Going back to the point that you mentioned, Moritz, I think that a challenge in the automotive industry is also the volume of devices. If you talk about smartphones, there are like hundreds of million new devices every year with like Android or like iOS and so on. But if you talk then about like level 5, like SDVs based on your classification, I mean, until you have to like a critical mass, this will take a while. Yeah. So because like you have like the ones from China or Tesla that sell quite amount of vehicles, but what is it, like a couple of millions a year? So it's very small. If we talk then about legacy OEMs, until they shift to like level 5 SDVs in their portfolio, I mean, this will take forever basically. Yeah, so they're not shifting overnight the whole portfolio, and then you have like level 5 with a switch. Yeah, so they do it probably model line by model line and so on. And that would be my critical point there, or like my fear that this ecosystem will not get that attractive to like developers to then create this app ecosystem that you mentioned, Florian, that we have seen for like the iPhone, or that for the Android ecosystem in there as well.
And I think this is exactly the sensitive point where a lot of the SDV dreams are completely mistaken. If you try to sell something like a TikTok in your cockpit, there's first of all no willingness to pay for this because you get it for free on your smartphone. You could mirror it with something like Android Auto. The other part is, even if you were able to charge for it, it would need to be at a comparable price point as a cell phone app.
Yeah.
The question is,
like
what are the applications? The question is, I mean, $1.50, and you have like 1.5 million cars out in the field with that platform. It doesn't make sense. Even with a huge market share, it wouldn't make sense. So the question really is, what applications can really cause significant cost saving that go out of a different wallet. So do you really target the vehicle market where someone wants to get, I don't know, like the next ambient lighting function that responds to music? Or do you really want to go for different use cases? I mean, imagine you have a fleet of vehicles on the street. They all have LiDAR, they have a bunch of cameras, they have ultrasound, they have positioning, they have weather sensors. What are the use cases that you can build around those driving sensors? And I think most use cases that will become commercially viable are outside of the classic OEM's business cases. So I really do think the SDV use case is not one of selling end functions to end customers. We will use it to deploy functions, but at least until the ecosystems get started, you need to have different markets for driving the value.
I mean, this question is actually around the political landscape. I mean, we have three spots actually: USA, Europe, and China, where all the activities more or less happen. How could politics, for example, influence the development of SDV industry at all? Also partnerships. I mean, this because if European companies or OEMs partner with Chinese startups, also, you know, I mean, there are recently also some, I think. Volkswagen was, or Cariat was, I think, partnering with some Chinese companies, I think.
Chopin,
yeah, Chopin, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what do you think?
I mean, first of all, that was a question we tried to avoid, but it's probably naturally coming up today. With me sitting here in the US, let me take the first step on it. So I wouldn't target it directly to SDV because SDV is something that naturally progresses, but it's always coupled up also with transformation to electric and so on. I personally would expect a slowdown in that through the political situation we have right now. I let Augustine have a take on partnerships across the different ponds, meaning oceans, and how that might be affected by that. Because there are going to be some more restrictions than we have right now.
Yeah, so it's, I think we talk in this sense, if you are like also if you think about the US software ban that was discussed a couple of weeks ago or months ago, and I think it's still there on the agenda. I mean, we think it just affects like the Chinese OEMs that want to come to the US, and I don't know, like Zeekr or NIO or Xiaopeng, you name it, yeah. But I would assume that a lot of suppliers, Western suppliers, and also OEMs have software developed in China with like their local teams, and this is also affected. Yeah, so I mean, this has like a very broad reach or wide reach, I would say, because like a lot of also like incumbents have like some teams or partners in China that are developing software for them, and they will also be affected by that. Yeah, so that will be, I would say, very tricky. Yeah, let's see how this will plays out, and let's hope for the best.
Just one add-on for the listeners who are not in the US. We don't have Chinese vehicles on the US market right now, and I don't expect to get any on the US market in the next.
Oh, really? Well, what is the reason? I mean.
So the Chinese, and I worked for NIO for a year. So the Chinese, they are started with their own market, which was big enough to keep them busy for a while. And the next expansion is over to Europe because it is a little bit simpler for them to get into the European market. And there's still a big market to cover first. And the next step for them is the US market. But I don't see that really accelerating right now, rather the opposite.
Okay.
Polestar 2 was the only Chinese car on the US market.
Okay, yes, okay. This is like the Scandinavian Chinese car. Yes. Okay. Polestar 2 is on the road here, but it is not seen as a Chinese product, actually.
Until you look into the supply chain.
I don't know. I don't know how it is seen actually officially from like tariff point of view, because but in perception, the people see it as a Volvo clone, not as a Geely.
There is an interesting, topic which is also very. And we talked about this decoupling of hardware and software, and accelerating, so to say, the development on the software side is decoupled from hardware. I mean, there's a question about virtualization in cloud development. What do you think? How well it works, and does it have any feature? What do you think?
First of all,
SDV
thank you
context?
for that question that moves us away from the political corner. Yeah, who wants to take? I can take. Fatih, can you keep the questions in a little longer?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Okay, Maurice, go ahead.
I mean, from a technological perspective, it does work, yes. The interesting point is what's the adoption rate and what's the actual use throughout the industry. And I think there's still room to grow, definitely. Still, also, when I look at CI/CD topics, the degree of automation still lags behind other industries significantly. And also here for the virtualization topic, there's a lot of room to actually speed up the development process still. So I think right now it's not too much a matter of technology, but of adoption.
Yeah, what we see is also what's the granularity you want to have in your virtualization. So you can either go like ultra high fidelity, but then you're like 5 or 10 times real time because it is so much compute power you need for that. Or you go ultra low fidelity, but then you don't really have the trust that it does everything. All right, so there's some real cool stuff going on, and I mean, Moore's law applies, so the compute power goes up every year. So we very near term we will see really capable systems, and we will see that hardware test systems will be amended, not replaced, with virtual test systems.
But do you know any example actually where, I mean, publicly known where an OEM really leveraged to have this digital twin in the cloud? I mean, having fully for testing. I know only I've read a couple of AWS blog posts about that there are certain ECUs or some connected ECUs in the cloud, but I haven't seen until now a full vehicle, so to say, as a digital twin. I mean, I don't know if you know anything about that.
So at one point is also the question: what is a full vehicle? I mean, if you want to test over-the-air updates in a simulated environment, do you really need to have the friction coefficient of the tires modeled in there? No, you don't, right? So in general, the full vehicle, I don't think makes a lot of sense. It has to be really specialized and targeted system in the virtualization.
Yeah, would agree. I think it's more like different domains that are then tested in different systems. Like digital cockpit, I see the link in the comments as well. What QNX and AWS and Stellantis is doing, or if you think then about all the other systems as well with virtual testing there. I think now with the latest WinECE, what is it, 157 or something? Then like simulation and virtual testing could be also part of the homologation process for the first time. So I think that's an always domain specific.
But obviously, what do you think about this homologation process? Actually, I mean, this is usually in the classical OEM car development a long process. Until you get the approvals and so on. And if we have now SDVs, I mean, SDV means, in my opinion, you can continue your software actually. Homologation should also.
You have to look at which parts of the vehicle are homologation relevant after all. And since it's a regulatory requirement with a lot of paperwork. Okay. And in the end, the question is, how quickly can the regulatory bodies actually adapt to something quicker? And I think we will see the SDV-related value propositions way before any homologation-relevant processes are adapted.
I see quite some openness from the regulatory body to talk about it, because they also see what's happening or they foresee what's happening. It's like weekly software rollouts. We cannot do weekly homologations. We usually do like every 4 years, right?
Exactly.
One approach that is discussed is self-homologation, basically like what you see in the aerospace industry, that you get an initial homologation, and then from there on, you're responsible to prove in your release process of the software that you're within that window of homologation. And if
like the Boeing plane.
Yeah. I mean, it has its pros and cons. But one approach we at Tesla actually did with the homologation body EPA for the range. We had them certify our test equipment, basically to have a sealed EPA range test system, and that we were allowed to use that to do our EPA range testing internally. And this is something, and I talked with a couple of folks who are in that world, and they say, hey, we are usually 10, 20 years slower than you guys, and you are already the slow ones compared to the what Moritz just mentioned, the CI/CD guys. But they are open for the discussion, and you meet them at certain events, and there's something is moving there. So also homologation will change with the SDVs compared to what we had like 30, 40 years ago.
I mean, do you mean also with safety relevant stuff? You know, I mean, in car you have a lot of safety relevant stuff, and if you frequently update things, I think this is quite difficult. I think. I mean, how to deal with that actually.
I think different markets will probably approach it slightly different. I think the European market will be more strict than the US market.
Germany especially. I think
Germany will very, very strict, of course. But they understand, both sides understand that there has to be some sort of like plan going forward, because at one point you will have ADAS functionality receiving over-the-air parameter changes, period.
Yeah, I mean that they need to change and adopt. I think that's clear. Also, like Florian, you mentioned ADAS and everything now about like the end-to-end approaches, like in ADAS or automated driving. I mean, that's or basically you can't really like, or there's less transparency, I would say, and it's hard to explain what's happening then there in the system. And I mean, also like regulators need to get ready for that as well. Of course, you can say, yeah, this will never get regulated or like homologated, and so on and so on. But I think there also we will see different approaches in the US and Europe and maybe Asia as well.
And I think we also have to draw a line between like the traditional homologation, like, you know, white lines in the front, or lights in the front, red lights in the back, and turn indicators with like 50% duty cycle. And then you also have the like crash testing and stuff like this, which is it's not part of the homologation, but it's part of the type approval, right? And there's a similar but different discussion, because obviously this is much more safety critical than if your turn indicator goes 45 or 50% duty cycle.
Okay. Yeah, I think this will be really challenging, especially in Europe, in Germany. I think I'm not so sure how other countries will deal with that, but in Germany, the laws and everything is so heavy here. You know, I don't know how this will be adapted so fast. I mean, if I look on the digitalization in Germany, especially, and how slow this goes, I don't know. I have some doubts.
Yeah. I mean, there also, again, like if you think about like ADAS or like ID, I mean, we in Germany, we celebrated that we have like an AD law, or that AD regulation. But I mean, you see that, okay, the magic is happening in the US with like Waymo and all the others, because they have like this more or less like self-regulation or self-homologation that Florian mentioned. And I mean, here it takes so long to then take this law and put it into then processes that OEMs can understand and then follow. So I think that's also a challenge we have here.
But what you see is that the OEMs also fall back and or sit back and point towards that direction. So it's like, hey, we can't innovate because of that. While US has a little bit of different approach, especially the Silicon Valley companies. They say if it's not explicitly forbidden, it's allowed until somebody tells anything else. So let's just get it started and then work with the lawmakers and get something. Just an example, when you look at the UNECE R156 for some software update management system, it's basically a blueprint of Tesla's software update management system they run for 12 years. So if they would have waited for that, that would never have happened.
Okay. Interesting approach. There is one question about open source initiatives. Actually, this is also some kind of a partnership. I mean, there are big initiatives like Eclipse SDV or Covesa, and all these initiatives. What do you think about that? Actually, I mean,
I think the question is more specific. It's about the common stack creation. So actually,
is there any common stack creation? I mean, is there any common stack creation?
There's obviously the initiative to create a common software platform in open source that actually would go into vehicles. So can we open source this? And I think this is where still a number of perceptions of how open source projects work are a bit mistaken. In the end, if there's an open source project, even if there's process-related artifacts being created in the scope of this project, the question is who takes up liability or maintenance for these topics. I mean, even when we look at Linux, there's virtually no one using a Linux without a professional maintenance around it for mission critical or business critical activities. You simply don't do that because you want to have someone that takes care of it on a professional level. So I'm actually still surprised that we see so many homegrown Yocto variants in building ECUs, because this is precisely the risk that people are taking then, that you're responsible of maintaining this for the periods of the UNICE R155, right? Do you want to maintain a homegrown Yocto for 15 years? So I think the question is, first of all, can you attract developers to build this? And secondly, do you have business models around it that actually these developers are getting their salaries paid? Because also Linux is predominantly not developed by hackers in the basement that do this on their free time. It's a professional software platform, and people are. Let's follow my hoodie.
Florian, when he has nothing else to do.
Yeah, I don't have a basement though. I just want to get one more thought to what Morris just said, and then I'm sure Augustine has a flurry of ideas about this topic. So from a functional safety point of view, these kind of like common stacks or whatever open source, you have to treat that as a out of context element, and you are responsible to validate it completely through, and you're responsible for whatever happens to it. So that's just a thought on top of that. So just open source doesn't mean you get everything like packed with a ribbon on top, you put it in, you don't have to do anything.
And I think with this project, if the question is referring to the Mercedes, BMW, Accenture project, they're about like what is it called, open core stack or something. It's also super early to tell. I mean, they're just getting started. I think it's in proposal phase on Eclipse or at Eclipse SDV. So let's see how this is progressing then.
I mean, I think in general, open source and safety, safety relevant stuff is quite, hot topic. I mean, I had this discussion a couple of times because open source, it's safety critical things.
So there's essentially 4 ways that you can take to use safe open source software for safety critical purposes. One is you start retrofitting safety on an open source project. Whenever there comes a change, you do all the process-related activities, you do the reanalysis of your technical safety concept and try to keep up with the community. It can work for very small-scale projects where you may have explicit control over the governance, so it's not like an open contribution model, these kind of things, then it can work. It doesn't work with very lively communities where you get a lot of inflow of new features. The other option that you can do, number 2, is you take the open source project, fork it off, do the retrofitting, and keep to yourself. So essentially,
then you own it.
Then you own it. You're right.
Yeah.
Still has the same restrictions, right? Can be done for small-scale projects that have a limited code base, and then there's, of course, that approach to trying to automate safety certification. I think it cannot work because when you get an incoming change from a community, well, you need to do a semantic check whether it applies to your technical safety concept.
Yes.
Semantic checks, in my point of view, cannot be automated. I don't see any way to reasonably do that. And the other part, the 4th way that you can do, is you don't safety certify the open source software, but you put something around it that looks whether the open source software behaves as expected. And the beauty of such an approach is that you can actually keep up with the speed of the community. You can paste in the changes in that open source software as you like, and you just need to keep that supervision component around it stable. There's of course restrictions on, well, the interfaces between those must be stable, these kind of things, but this is also possible. But I think really there's no other way than those four options, and most of them don't work for large scale projects.
By the way, I've seen the fourth option also in practice for off-the-shelf hardware or system components, not only for open source software.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, is there any? I mean, at the moment, I'm not really sure if there is anything rolled out in any, OEM like this, that you have some kind of a safety layer and you put unsafe software on it. I mean, is there any example? I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I mean, the example on a smaller scale, like drivers and stuff like this in infotainment systems, there's a lot of open source or like sourced from the market, black box. Maybe it's not open source, but maybe it's forked out. But yeah, you see that a lot, and then you have like a supervisor, hypervisor, whatever, sitting on top of that. That's come, but not as a large piece of software that really has like a customer or user perceivable, like really active function.
I mean, things that you do see is in cockpit systems, for instance, the telltales, which have safety allocation, where you can have graphics stacks in the processing chain that are not safety certified, but you do check whether the telltales show the right pixels, so you start reading out your image buffer, these kind of things you do see. When it comes to Linux and safety, we do exactly such an approach for Linux for safety applications, actually monitor that Linux behaves correctly. So there is options to do these things, but it's not very commonplace on large-scale open source projects so far.
And it also depends what kind of OEMs you're looking at, like really legacy versus more cutting edge. I think more on the cutting edge side, you see more stuff. Oh, hi, Srinath.
There is this quite interesting question, I think. What, in your opinion, is the key reason SDVs have not yet become commonplace in EU and North America yet? I mean, I feel it's related to lots of legacy architecture. I need to unwind versus starting from scratch is always easier. I mean,
it's always good when the question comes with the answer already.
Yeah, I wanted to say the same. You're already answering your question.
And I would disagree. I think one of the big problems is business models at OEMs. If you start calculating your business cases based on the bill of material and you have part owners that are responsible for single ECUs, that's what you're getting. You're getting vertically integrated ECUs that are performance cost optimized to reduce the bill of materials. And that's
also for legacy reasons.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would say it's legacy architecture and legacy decision making.
Yeah. Right. So I mean, if you want to decouple the life cycle of software platform and hardware that you're selling, then you need to separate them from a business perspective. And that's mostly not being done.
I agree. And actually, going back to the Tesla example, Tesla software is a fixed cost. Software is paid at the 1st of January, and they work through what they can work through during the year. You don't write to a platform or you don't write to a project. This is just the number of developers you have, do the number of tasks they can, and then the projects pick that up. So like this, it's completely financially decoupled from of course, the cars, every car sold has a certain percentage of the sell value that goes into the software organization. But if they sell more Model S than Model X, it doesn't matter to the software organization.
Yes.
Okay.
And the software organization wouldn't get anything done if they build a new variant for each and every car line, right?
That's on top of that. That's for sure.
But how this? I mean, you told this also, this vertical integration. I mean, you have actually is silos, But how to break this? Actually, I mean, this is. I think this is a big challenge for the big OEMs to break the silos, to bring them together. I mean, I don't know. At least how to do that.
I mean,
a big organization.
There's plenty of examples now where we have OEMs with big software organizations that claim to build a software platform. I mean, I said that before, I'm counting 15 different ones. Augustine probably knows even more. I mean, when we talk about things like Audify, STLA Brain, Volkswagen OS, OS, all these different platforms that we see. And yet, when we look at building actual vehicles, building actual ECUs. It boils down to the bill of materials. And I think this is where one of the root causes really is. Can you separate those business cases?
Mm. Mhm. Yeah, probably. Yeah. But leveraging SDV will not work otherwise. I mean, I think this silos SDV somehow. Yeah. I mean, OEM has to change. I think from this siloed thinking to more,
Yeah,
horizontal thinking. I think. I mean, this is that,
or neither. So more open.
Oh yeah. Okay.
In general, it's a technical challenge. It's a cultural challenge, and I would say it's more a cultural or mindset challenge than it is a technical challenge.
I would fully agree. And then, like with the discussions I have, I mean, to talk about technology, software, etc. That's always easy. If it comes into like business model, business case, it's get a bit more complicated, and still, it's hard to find solutions there. But like the hardest part is always like changing then the organization, changing then the mindset, and yeah, I think that's like slowing them down, or that's why it's not feasible or not possible really that they change as intended.
I mean, why, for example, harmonization or standardization on hardware does not work in automotive? Why don't we have a single ECU for brakes, for example? Every OEM use. I mean, the same hardware. Why does?
Yeah, but an interesting observation is actually it's from the outside, yes, but it actually boils down to just like a handful of chips that are in there. So there's actually a lot of initiatives. They're talking about processor in the loop testing, for example, because they say it's only like a handful of chips that are spread over the car. At Tesla, for example, we had the same chip in the drive inverter, in the battery management system, and in the onboard charger. So at that point, once you realize that, then you can actually find also collaboration options, or as actually Srinath just posts down here, maybe focus on the differentiator, which is the application or the high-level software.
Exactly.
And have more like a common low-level software.
But I think the software, also the hardware, both are not really the base software, and the ECU is not standardized. I mean, every OEM invents the wheel again and again. I mean,
but this is precisely the point that we had before about that open source software platform. So okay, let us develop this jointly, and no one owns it. The question is, how do you build it from a business perspective? Who spends money in it, and which entity, who takes the liability and ownership for it? And that's the question that's not being resolved on that. Yes, we should have one platform, but also everyone's afraid of going into a vendor lock-in.
Right. Yeah. But I would go forward and say that the HPC architecture will address at least parts of it. The question is not answered from the financial point of view, but at the end, if you have an HPC platform that can go into different vehicle models that is highly configurable, it will actually address at least parts of those concerns.
Yes.
Yeah. And to your point, I think the risk of those open source platforms is to know, okay, if there will be then probably like regionalization again, so there might be then a European version and then a US one, and we also know from automotives that they're maybe not committed long term. So what do you do then if one of your main contributor or like financial partner is then dropping out and say, I'm out, goodbye, do it without me? Then I mean the other ones that are participating have a problem. I think this needs to be fixed as well.
Yeah, you need a consortium or something like this, like you have with Ubuntu for Linux or something.
Yeah, true. And then like also have like long-term commitments and I don't know, like guardrails that they can't drop out from one day to another.
Yeah. So I would like, Fatih, I would like to take the last 5 minutes to, since we have Augustine here, to really pick his brain here on some. So when you look at the existing or upcoming partnerships you see, which one do you think is like really, really interesting and has promise? Which one you think is like, wow, okay, that's that's a moonshot?
You talk about which kind of partnerships between OEMs or
actually, I would like to know both, like between two OEMs and also between OEMs and totally new to automotive companies?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say the category of traditional OEMs with newcomer OEMs is quite interesting. So Stellantis with Lemotor, what is then happening in China also with Jaguar Land Rover or Tata and Chery. Then of course like what's happening at the Volkswagen Group with the different partners. So that's on OEM level. Then if you talk about more like hardware in the cars and then software. What Qualcomm is doing now with their partnership approach on either like digital cockpit or like then also others AD software. Then also quite interesting what's happening in the cloud with the different cloud partners, traditional suppliers. Then I mean there you have also tons of partnerships with I think Google and Conti and BlackBerry QNX, AWS, Stellantis. And then, of course, we have less information, but what I would say it's also one of the lighthouse partnerships is with Stellantis and Amazon on development of the software platform. So they are really curious to see then the results.
So I'm also curious, the Japanese OEMs, did they miss the train? Or do I just not have visibility?
To be honest, I don't have full visibility there. But what is quite interesting, they also now after the government released the software-defined vehicle strategy for like Japan, you might have heard of that, so that they want to reach 30% SDV market share by 2025 and 2030. Where they now like force
just by ordering it.
No, I think they're also in incentives and I think like programs, and they force the different Japanese OEMs to work together. So that's why you have now like Toyota, Mazda, and so on forming these groups. Or I think yesterday or the day before was, or like maybe it was also last week, I don't know, Nissan and Mitsubishi working together now on ADAS and AD. You have then Toyota that is investing 3 billion in ADAS development, I think with NTT, and so on and so on. So I think what's this would be also quite interesting to follow what is happening there on like with their software-defined vehicle strategy that comes from the government to push like the local OEMs again to more software-defined vehicle products. Because as of today, I mean, also if you look at the Gartner Digital Auto Index and so on, I mean, they're the Japanese OEMs, doesn't matter if it's like Nissan or if it's Toyota or Subaru and so on, they're quite at the end of the list there.
Okay, you gave me some homework now. Thanks.
Okay. I mean, there is one question here. Challenges Qualcomm could be their long-term commitment. I think this was connected to your last conversation.
Yeah, I mean I think that's a question with all the tech players, I would say. Or I mean, they all see the big dollars in automotive, but to be honest, I mean also in Nvidia, is the revenue share of Nvidia in automotive is, I don't know, like 1 to 2% of their business. For them, it's way more attractive, I would say, to scale like data centers and so on than to work with complex automotive OEMs. Yeah, so I mean, this question you could ask about all the different tech players, I would say, and then also the same is with another like circling back to the beginning of our discussion here today with like the startups. Yeah, so what about the long-term commitment of then startups or in the automotive space?
What is a long-term commitment of right? What's worth it? A long-term commitment from a startup?
Yeah.
Yeah, but in general, I think because those let's say startups have really a cutting edge on the technology, the OEMs are really taking a little bit more risk on that than they used to have, from my point of view.
Yeah, and if we talk about Qualcomm, I mean, what we see now is that they're expanding their activities, or I mean, what they do in ADAS and AD development, and then also with the investments they do there, the same, and also with like the in-vehicle or like the digital cockpit activities with the new chipsets. They have new partnerships there as well, investing also probably in on software capabilities. So it's you never know, I would say, but I wouldn't be that worried.
I'd agree with that.
I mean, we are approaching the end of our conversation, actually. We're just 1 minute left. It was really very interesting conversation again. Thanks, Augustine, for joining. Florian, Moritz, it was really interesting. There are a couple of questions still open. Feel free to answer them on LinkedIn on the comments. Thanks for joining, Augustine. Thank you so much, and see you next time, or probably
Next Christmas edition.
again. Yeah. Okay. See you.
All right.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.